Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. We have two fabulous authors with us just this evening, Josh Rank and KW Oxnard. But before we begin, I want to remind everyone to like, follow, subscribe, and also share from wherever you're watching. And also, you are able to leave comments in real time from wherever you're watching, and we will see them. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Welcome, Josh Rank and KW Oxnard, also known as Kathy. So we're happy to have you on board this evening, and we're looking forward to reading your work, hearing your work. So we start usually alphabetical order by first name. So we're going to start with Josh. Josh, if you would give us a little bit about your book and what you're going to read. Everyone, this is what the cover looks like. So, yeah. So, Josh, let us know about this book.
Sure. Hello, everybody. This is my second book with Unsolicited Press. The President Has Passed came out in 2023, so I'm very excited to have another one out with these wonderful people. Estuary is a story about a guy who finds out that an ex-girlfriend of his had a child without telling him. He finds out about this through a diary entry that he didn't write. This diary has a bit of a history of telling him things that haven't happened quite yet. But he has trouble believing it because it's just such an unbelievable thing. So he goes out to confront her about this to see if the child is actually his, and then learns that the child is dead. And the little bit that I'm going to be reading takes place in the second part of the book, which is from her point of view. But we can get into all that in just a little bit. But yeah, the book is basically just about that. The idea of the diary was the first thing that came to me. There's a band called the Mars Volta, which is strangely where the idea for this book came from. They like to make up fake stories about their albums and like where it came from and all that. And their second album is called Francis the Mute. And they told everybody that the story comes from a diary that their friend found while he was a repo man repossessing a car. It's not true at all. But I always thought that was a really cool story. And then from there, it branched out to becoming a diary that writes its own entries and tells you things about your life and all that. So that's where the nugget of the story came from, and then branched out from there. The one really cool thing about this book, besides the fact that it's actually getting published, is great, is that the cover art is done by a friend of mine, and he just did a great job. I love the way that it turned out. So being able to kind of like join our powers together is a very cool thing, and hearing everybody having very positive things to say about it is very great. And I always pass that along to him. So thanks, Dom. You're the man. But yeah, should I just jump into the reading or what?
Yes, and let us know when the book is going to be published.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's still in pre-order status. Comes out on the 23rd of this month, so coming up pretty quick. I know that pre-orders are already hitting mailboxes now, which is super exciting. So apparently if you order books with this code at the bottom here tonight, you get 20% off. So that's always exciting. The chapter that I'm going to read is right after the guy confronts the girl. His name is Stephen. Her name is Megan. It's the day after that. And she told him that the kid was not his. So yeah, I guess I'll just get into it. So this is chapter 3 in the second section of the book. I didn't know the word repast until I hosted one. But of course, it's a party you host after a funeral where everyone stands around, eats snacks, and tries not to freak out. You have to offer a bunch of food. Everyone is required to mention how terrible of a loss it is. And it's a lot of work for a time when all you really want to do is stare at a wall and try to process the fact that you just watched your only son lowered into the ground. And now, 2 days later, I had to finish the cleanup. Tables and countertops were wiped right away, but a black crock pot and large serving tray needed to be returned to the rightful home of my parents. They were nice enough to bring barbecue meatballs and a huge serving of mac and cheese, a couple of Lincoln's favorite foods. Brandon managed to fall asleep after Stephen finally cleared out the day before. You get a few hours of rest into that man and his whole demeanor changes. I was the same zombie that sleepwalked through the last week on a faint suggestion of sleep. I don't think I fully drifted off, but there was definitely a moment where I was close. I felt that strange sensation of falling, even though I was firmly plastered into my side of the bed. The ceiling fan clicked rhythmically above. Brandon snored to my right, finishing off the nap he took that afternoon. And just as the envelope of sleep was about to swallow me, I thought I heard something downstairs. It sounded like the TV, but underwater. I don't know, dreams are weird. I thought about getting up to see if we left the TV on or something, but of course the noise stopped the moment I sat up. Dreams don't tend to follow you out of bed. Sure, I was a little nervous about driving to Alpharetta on a combined 4 hours of sleep for the last week. They call it drowsy driving, which sounds like drunk driving's whimsical cousin until you learn it's responsible for almost 100,000 crashes every year. I'm sure most of these are pilled up semi-trucks ignoring their hours of service regulations, but at least a few of them are sleepless women wondering, do you stop being a mother the moment you lose your kid, or do you keep the title out of respect? They say being awake for 18 hours straight is the same as blowing a .05 BAC. So how does that compound over the course of a week? Obligation has a tendency to override caution, though. So I piled the serving tray and crock pot into the back seat of the minivan, so much room for a wheelchair I'd never use again, and tested my luck. Hank and Rebecca mostly made the strange decision to uproot our little family from Dayton, Ohio to Alpharetta when I was 6 years old. I feel like I should remember more of my time in Ohio, but the memories come in clips and chunks. I remembered snow in the winter and chipping my tooth next to the swings in kindergarten. I remember driving up to my grandparents' cabin near Sandusky, where I learned to hate fishing. But mostly I remember arriving in Georgia and feeling like an alien. Hank, Dad, got some big IT job with Coyote Logistics. He made it sound like he just hit a button to update their software all day, but realistically, he was in charge of maintaining their systems and keeping them running. It turned out to be a great decision as he stayed with the company all these years. He settled right into being a Southerner, and I'm surprised he didn't pick up the accent. The transition wasn't so easy for my mother, but the truth was that she wasn't in a great spot in Dayton either. She wouldn't tell me this until after Lincoln was born, but postpartum really kicked her ass for much longer than she felt comfortable admitting. Their plan was always to have a large family. They wanted to be surrounded by children, but Mom's depression scared the shit out of her. It wasn't until I was 5 that she re-entered the workforce to kickstart herself out of her hole. Teaching special education at a local elementary school either distracted her or gave her a sense of purpose. All I know is that she felt better almost immediately. Unfortunately, it wasn't so easy to find a job once we moved to Alpharetta the next year. Coyote Logistics paid more than enough, so she found other ways to occupy herself when she wasn't chasing me around the neighborhood. The drive to their house always sucked, but being half asleep might have made it more dangerous, but it also somehow made it more bearable. Their house sat on a little less than an acre. It was actually a Milton address, but it's just easier to tell people it's in Alpharetta. They moved out here a few years earlier, so I had no connection to the home. I never lived there besides a few weeks after graduation when I learned I was pregnant. Realistically, I should have stayed there through the pregnancy, but I had already moved into a place of my own. It sure would have made things easier. Mom crouched in the mulch next to the Chinese snowball viburnums below the picture window in front of the house. She took great pride in her landscaping. She turned her head when I pulled into the driveway and stood up. "Hey," she said when I climbed out of the Chrysler. I grabbed the tray and crock pot from the back seat. "Hi, Mom." "Let's go inside," she said. "I'm dying out here." She hesitated slightly when she realized what she had said, but didn't mention it. I followed her in through the garage. They rarely use the front door for some reason. "You're going to get heat stroke doing that in the middle of the day." I set the tray with the crock pot nestled on the counter above the dishwasher. Their home smelled new. It always did, as if they replaced the carpeting every other week. The decor is exactly what you'd guess for a new construction home owned by two people quickly approaching retirement. Plaques with uplifting phrases scattered throughout the kitchen, old family photos framed next to them, a strangely modern light fixture to complement the track lighting on an angled ceiling. Mom grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator and held it out to me. I waved my hand. She cracked the top and took a large swig. "How are you doing?" she asked me after screwing the lid back on the bottle. I shrugged. I don't know. I just want you to know we love you, and it won't feel this way forever. I heard countless versions of this throughout the funeral, but I couldn't sit through it again. Something kind of weird happened yesterday. I didn't plan on telling the story when I walked in. In fact, I didn't want to tell the story, but I couldn't listen to any more platitudes. Mom crossed her arms and leaned back against the refrigerator. I ran a finger along the countertop, but didn't go anywhere. "You remember Stephen Trumbull?" She rolled her eyes. "Of course I do." "Well, I saw him yesterday." "Really?" She pushed herself off the refrigerator and walked over to one of the stools lined along the countertop separating the kitchen and the dining room. She sat down and I stood on the other side like a bartender. I nodded. "How's he doing? Where did this happen?" He's fine, I guess. He showed up at my house. He what? I nodded. So he just kind of appeared? Yeah, kinda. She stared at me but didn't say anything. I always suspected she was mad when we broke up. She seemed to like him more than me. He asked about Lincoln. Her face softened. Oh, so he heard. Well, not really. I felt a strong urge to just turn around and walk out the door. I took a deep breath. He had this crazy idea that he might be Lincoln's birth dad. Mom shook her head a bit. What? Yeah, I know. It's crazy. But she didn't respond. She just sat there looking at me for a moment. Why would he ask you that? I think you're ignoring the fact that an ex-boyfriend showed up unannounced at a house he'd never been to before. Had no reason for knowing I lived there. It's kind of creepy. She nodded. It's certainly a lot of work. She took another drink from the bottle of water. But why? Why what? Where did he get this idea from? I drew in a breath but just held it for a moment. Have you ever held onto a lie for 6 years and then someone pokes a tiny hole in the concrete you've secured around it within yourself? An outward pressure builds that you've never felt before. Lincoln wasn't from a one-night stand, was he? I still held my breath and it grew hot. I was just so tired, so worn out. Megan, what did you say to him? I released the breath and the sentence just came out in a jumble. I said no. But that wasn't true, was it? I looked at her for a moment before I shook my head. Oh, Megan. What does it matter now? What could it possibly do but make it worse? But it's the truth, she said calmly. What does the truth matter? Lincoln's dead. The kitchen was already quiet, but the last word of my sentence somehow sucked out even more noise from the atmosphere. 3 breaths passed before Mom spoke up again. That boy was Stephen's just as much as he was yours. The sentence rang through my head as I drove home, no matter how much I disagreed with it. Stephen made his choices and I made mine. There was no changing that now. Admitting my mistake to Stephen, I fully admit it was a mistake, would be an attempt to rewrite the past, and I had no interest in that. But I still couldn't get it out of my head. That boy was Stephen's just as much as he was yours. Hours passed. Nighttime came. I went over my conversation with my mother 1,000 times. I turned from my right to my left side in the bed with Brandon sleeping next to me. I felt myself easing finally, mercifully towards sleep when I heard the TV downstairs as I had the night before. Except this time, the sound didn't disappear when I woke up. I tried to calm my breathing and avoid waking Brandon. I slipped out of bed and cracked open the bedroom door. The sound of high-pitched voices and exaggerated sound effects came from downstairs. We turned the TV off before coming to bed. I knew that much for sure. Were there ways for it to turn back on by accident, fluke of the remote control, or a surge in power? I tried to talk myself out of a scene that popped into my head, of a stranger out of his mind on drugs or illness, sitting on the couch ready to fly into a rage at the slightest provocation. But it was all too crazy to believe. Should I wake Brandon, have him chase my phantom away? My pride wouldn't let a man solve my problems for me. Why start now? I crept from the room, careful not to make a noise, but not sure why. Our floors didn't creak. In fact, the carpet of the hallway muted each footstep. The stairs, on the other hand, reported each shift in weight. The sound of the TV grew louder as I took the steps one at a time, pausing halfway between each one. A soft flurry of white static briefly flooded my vision as I realized how hard my heart beat in my chest. I'd have to control myself or risk passing out and falling the remaining 4 steps. But that was difficult considering I could now see the light from the television bouncing off the front wall of the house. There was no denying it now. Breathing became impossible and I slowly crossed the kitchen. I couldn't see anything besides the flashing lights, but something told me I wasn't alone. It wasn't a hunch, not a feeling. It was a belief as solid as recognizing yourself in the mirror. I recognized the voices on the TV now. Mandy and Pandy, 2 anthropomorphic panda bears, were now discussing how to build a fence. I'd seen this episode multiple times, and the recognition of their voices almost comforted my staggered breaths and jackhammer heart. This was Lincoln's favorite show. I reached the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, but hesitated before glancing around the corner. What was I expecting to see? My mind raced, but landed on nothing. I slowly moved my head around the corner. Oh my God, I said. Lincoln sat upright on the couch with his hands folded in his lap. He stared at the screen. Lincoln? My knees buckled and I grabbed tight to the wall, catching myself. I didn't fall over, but it was close. And when I returned my gaze to the couch, it was empty. Mandy and Pandy continued their discussion on the TV.
Wonderful and intriguing.
Thank you.
So now we're going to hear from Kathy. Her author's name is K.N. Oxenard, and her book is The Leg in Question. Can you tell us a little about this book?
Sure. So it's a collection of short stories which are thematically linked. And they all have doctors or patients struggling with the many ways our bodies and spirits betray us. Some are in the point of view of doctors, some are in the point of view of patients, some are in the point of view of people related to one of the two of them. And they range from this one that I'm going to read from is the title story, and it is set in the early 20th century in New York City. But others are set in the Caribbean or various places and various times. So there's a big range. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the leg in question. It's a longer story, so I'll just read a portion of it. The patient came to me on a bitter winter afternoon, complaining of an ache in her calf. There is something dreadfully wrong, Dr. Valerie, Miss Williams said flatly. Her fingers, short and stubby for such a tall, thin girl, traced the line of her tibia. I am in constant pain. I have nightmares in which the leg causes my entire body to rot. The fact is, I am not myself with this leg attached to me. I see only one solution. It must come off. My nurse Dorina's glance betrayed her surprise, but she quickly mastered herself and moved to Miss Williams's side. There, dearie. The doctor is only trying to make a complete diagnosis. Why not lie down then and let him do his business? My patient, Miss Williams, glared at her, a paralyzing stare that reeked of entitlement and even more of willfulness. Miss Williams had come to us via my colleague, Dr. Joseph Friedman, a successful private physician for well-to-do patients. Though he hadn't met the girl's parents, he knew of the Williams family on Central Park West, one of the rich Bohemian clans the Great War had bred, who made millions off munitions, textiles, automobiles, bandages, and who now walked around with a glamorous sense of guilt that could only be assuaged by doing good. Miss Williams' fortune issued from the biscuits carried to ward off hunger in the trenches. Hard rectangles of shortbread, famous among doughboys for their flavor and freshness after a week in a rucksack. The company even stamped the portraits of American presidents on the tops to inspire the soldiers. Lincoln, Adams, Washington. All of this the girl had explained to Dr. Friedman during his course of treatment, which had consisted of tonics, manipulations, and occasional analgesics. And all of this he related to me when he passed along her file, rolling his green eyes and adding, "Meshuggah, this one. I wish you luck, Paul." As I turned Miss Williams' leg gently, her whimpering brought me up short. I consider myself an expert on the emanations of the afflicted. When a diagnosis eludes me, I listen. Not just to a patient's heart or lungs, but to his sighs, the clicks of his joints, the unconscious grinding of his teeth. By the time they arrive in my examination room, many are either well on their way to the grave or suffering from an acute illness that can be treated, but not without great sacrifice. Again, I palpated her right leg. Immediately, the muscles contracted. The noise I heard from Miss Williams reminded me of wind through a drafty house, both chilling and familiar. Tears glazed her cheeks, and she cupped her head in her hands. "You may sit up now," I said, and motioned for Dorina to leave us. Miss Williams composed herself, buttoning up long skirts, looking for her sturdy boots and lacing them with trembling hands. When she had finished, I sat down in the room's only chair. "Miss Williams, I am prepared for the worst, Dr. Valerie." She reached into her pocket for a handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes, red and swollen with tears. "Miss Williams," I tried again, "I find nothing wrong with your leg. Perhaps there is some other reason for your pain, something more personal." I trailed off, allowing her to fill in the psychosomatic diagnosis, as female patients often do with little prompting. The young woman bridled, pulling her shoulders back and placing her hands in her lap. Dr. Valerie, someone with severe blindness often has no pain in the eyes, nor any visible scarring or, and here she practically sneered, abnormality. But you wouldn't say there is nothing wrong with his eyes, would you? No, I suppose not. And I can see there may be something I've missed, some hidden condition. Now I decided to take a risk. I assume that Dr. Friedman is not the first to have examined you? She blinked. And they too have found nothing wrong? Still no answer. Well, I said, gathering up my charts, stethoscope, and other instruments that I had not, in fact, needed. There is nothing to do but wait and monitor your condition. I expected some sort of breakdown. Hysteria had many manifestations, as Dr. Freud had observed, imagined illness being one of them. The trauma and pain were real, the condition invented. I had no recourse but to continue to see the patient and attempt a sort of truncated psychoanalysis. These days, Dr. Freud's theories are so familiar as to be banal, but back then they were new and intriguing. I admired the skill with which he unearthed neuroses, especially in female patients. But how to engage an unwilling and unsuspecting woman in the analytical process? I knew I must concoct a ruse to keep her coming back. If not, she would go on to vex other physicians, perhaps ending up with some quack who might ply her with snake oil. No, that wasn't the whole of it. I admit that I was fascinated by the schism between the sensible girl before me and the hint of mystery in her pain. I can't deny that I craved the challenge inherent in persuading Miss Williams that her problem was not physical, but mental. Odd, this. I did not delight in proving patients wrong. Indeed, I conducted my practice with an eye toward healing the sick and my pocketbook in equal parts. Of course, I had intellectual yearnings. I read journals, attended conferences, kept up with the latest medical breakthroughs. But when I met Miss Williams, I was nearing 50, and my medical career had proven far less generous in the doling out of opportunities and acclaim than I had hoped for as a young man. So I had let the ambitious part of me atrophy. Out of the blue came this patient and her damaged leg, and suddenly the old, curious part of me stirred. When the patient did not erupt in tears or anger over my Freudian insinuations, I continued. We shall discover, Miss Williams, over time, the source of your discomfort. I promise not to give up on your case, to pursue this until we have rid you of pain. With her legs dangling off the examining table, Miss Williams looked like an awkward schoolgirl, shoulders slumped forward, head hanging over her chest. I heard no reply, so I said goodbye and went into my office where Dorina was working on the books. After the Great War, some nurses had foregone the crisp little white cap in favor of a hair comb. Yet Dorina clung to her cap, which propelled her like a sloop under a stiff breeze, bosom swelling into a taut mizzen. A nurse, a wrangler of errant children who refused to cooperate with inoculations, and a genius at the business of running a small practice in a bureaucratic city hospital. Dorina held our little operation together. Hiring her was the best thing I'd ever done, despite my wife Helen's protestations about the Irish and that I'd regret it the first time she came in with a hangover. Dorina looked up from the books, her round, ruddy face furrowed with skepticism. She'll be needing another appointment then? I smiled. Ah, Dorina, you know me too well. That one won't be satisfied with a pain powder and a fare-thee-well. She'll want some attention, she will, if I'm not completely daft. She paused and closed the ledger. But doctor, if I may speak out of turn? I nodded, and seeing no one else scheduled, sat in the leather armchair behind my desk. Dorina straightened up as if preparing to sing, which she did on occasion, beautiful Irish ballads and sea shanties. Her father had been a fisherman in County Galway. This one, she's touched, Dr. Valerie. I see it in her eyes. In her eyes, Dorina? Were you finding anything the matter then? I shook my head and looked down at Miss Williams' chart. Not with her leg, anyway. Might it be wiser then to send her on to that Dr. Ham at the clinic on 14th Street? They'll give her excellent care, and what can we do for her, really? Dorina had ventured opinions before, mostly related to running the office, and I respected her ideas on a host of issues, but not medical ones. I cleared my throat and laid the clipboard on the desk next to the ledger. I will see her next Friday at 4 p.m. The day arrived, and the weather had worsened, this proving to be a particularly frigid yet dry December. Miss Williams showed up 10 minutes early. The examination went smoothly. I tapped her knees, looked in her eyes, and this time took some blood, ostensibly to test for pleurisy and epilepsy, but in truth so that she might begin to trust me as we moved into this ad hoc version of Dr. Freud's process. How have you been, Miss Williams? Are the pains worse? She lay on the examining table, head turned away while I extracted 2 vials of thick, crimson blood from her left arm. Her hands fell limp at her sides like dead doves. They are unbearable, Dr. Valerie. I wake with the pain, go to bed with the pain. It is so severe that it wakes me from the deepest sleep. I can't even look at the leg without wishing it away. Her right foot twitched in illustration of her point. It is as if termites had infested a house and were slowly devouring a supporting wall. I can't walk down the street for fear that at any moment my leg might crumble. Removing the needle, I asked her to sit up and bend her arm over the wound to stanch the flow. Miss Williams, I admit that I am baffled by your case. So baffled indeed that I would like to try something that may at first seem unorthodox, but that I have found to bring excellent results in resistant diagnoses. For the first time in our acquaintance, Miss Williams brightened. A smile was such a stranger to her face, I could not say she wore anything like it now. But the muscles around her mouth relaxed, bringing youth back into that oddly mature countenance. Oh, Dr. Valerie, you do understand. Her hands, inert just minutes earlier, became animated, and after searching for a comfortable resting spot, eventually landed in her lap. Yes, of course, I welcome new methods. Good, very good. Let us retire to my office.
Wonderful, wonderful story. So I think now begins the Q&A part of our evening. Um, Both of you have written about people who are experiencing somewhat paranormal or extraordinary circumstances. In one case, we have a diary revealing that one of the characters has a child that the mother hid from him. And in your case, there's the case of the mysterious leg. So let's talk about what inspired each of your stories. So do you want to start with Josh, since you're alphabetically?
Alphabetical, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of mentioned it in when I was babbling before I was reading, that I was inspired by a Mars Volta album. But yeah, that kind of combined with just general Stephen King books is really what it came down to. There's no deep, parallel with fate or anything like that. I just thought it was a cool thing.
Okay, well that works. It obviously worked enough to complete a novel. And Catherine.
Yeah, I don't know where exactly I read about this phenomenon. There are people who believe that there is something wrong with one of their limbs, and they are happy until the limb is removed. And I found that fascinating. It was, hard to wrap my head around. But somehow it ended up that I was imagining this time right after the First World War in New York, and this who is just kind of intrigued by Freud, and he's, as it says in the story, he's sort of nearing the end of his career, and he's craving a challenge, and he gets one with Miss Williams. She's a challenge. She's not who she says she is. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, now I'm intrigued. So, when you were reading, I was reminded of that very famous short story, "The Yellow Wallpaper,"
Mm-hmm.
where women were locked in their rooms for real, mostly
Yeah.
when they disagreed with their husbands. They were said that they were insane, so
Yes.
or hysterical. So, does
Yeah.
Miss Williams have any of that? Is she married or single or um?
So her story is that she comes from this wealthy family who made money off the war, and we find out relatively quickly in the story that she has lost a brother in the Great War, and she's struggling with that grief. Um, give away too much, but that is not necessarily the truth about her.
Mm.
um,
Okay,
but
okay.
that is what she brings to Dr. Valerie. And that's what he's working through with her for a while until things take a sharp turn. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
And Josh, where did the idea of the ghost come from? Because from the part that you read, I believe the ghost is real, and you know, and talk a little bit about the paranormal nature of the story.
Sure. Yeah. So the first version of the story didn't have that at all. I
Mm.
was writing this with Lincoln is the child's name. The plan was for him to be alive for the whole book. And I got almost halfway through what I had planned for it. And I was just bored as I was writing it. And I would realize that if I'm not enjoying writing this, no one's going to enjoy reading it. So I just put it away for months. But I kept thinking about it because I really liked the start of the story and I thought I had something there. So I passed off the first section of it to a friend of mine and just was basically just like, is this worth continuing with? Like, because you don't know, when you're starting a first draft. And she encouraged me to keep going with it. And I just realized that the kid should be dead. I don't know why that occurred to me, but I was just like, that felt compelling. So I went on with it from there. And just the idea of the death hanging over their head, both literally and figuratively, was compelling enough to me to get back into the book. So, yeah.
Well, Lincoln is dead, but not really, because there he sits on the sofa as a ghost, even if only a few minutes. So how do you reconcile Lincoln the ghost character and then Lincoln? Obviously, the ghost is at rest or searching for something. So how do you? Sorry about the cats in the background. But how do you rectify, or how do you resolve Lincoln the ghost and Lincoln the dead child?
So you never see Lincoln alive in the story. As soon as we meet Megan, he's already gone. And as far as like resolving everything, I don't want to give away the end of the book.
Okay.
I was really struck by the way that you write about grief, Josh. That sort of feeling of the insomnia and the temporary insanity of it. The fact that you feel like you're sort of losing your mind over grief. It's almost like you're being poisoned by it or something. It's very you're just in it. You're swimming in it, and I felt that you really got that on the page. It's beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the you also write about grief, Kathy. Is your whole collection, even though it's unconnected stories only related by theme, do you also explore grief a lot in your stories, or
I
sickness or
do.
maladies?
Yeah. I'm thinking of one story in particular called Scent, which is from the point of view of a dog
So are you
missing
saying scent SENT or scent SCENT?
SCENT, like
Okay.
the
Yeah,
nose.
okay.
It's written from the point of view of a dog who is grieving. It's it's owned by a family of a mom, a dad, and a young daughter, and the young daughter has been ill, and it's grieving her. So that one in particular was really interesting for me to write that from the point of view of the dog and trying to get into, how a dog would perceive its person, and miss its person, and how it would think that it catches a whiff of that person when somebody, brings something that had been owned by her or whatever. So, but many of the stories, there's another story uh, called Your Better Half, which is about someone who's lost his soul, and it's from the point of view of his girlfriend trying to help him find his soul. And there's some magical realism in that, because the soul is an actual entity who leaves and goes on the lam, and she has to go find the soul. And so um, the person she's dating is grieving his soul, even though he won't admit it. And the soul is grieving his person, and she's grieving the fact that the two are split. So yeah, I think grief is, I mean, when we have physical and mental and spiritual ailments, um, there's a death, even when there's no literal death, there's a death of a dream or an idea or an ability or something.
So, and how did you come with to the idea of writing about doctors and patients? That's a very time honored subject. Lots of writers, especially writers with science background, I'm thinking of Andrea Barrett and her uh, ship of cholera, written about the times of cholera, and Abraham Varghese writing about leprosy in
Mhm.
his latest book.
Yeah.
So, how did you come to this, to focusing on doctors and patients and sickness and
Yeah.
not health?
Um, in a word, fear. I am not a doctor or a nurse or anybody in the healthcare profession. I come from a medical family from both sides. My grandfather was a doctor, aunts, uncles, cousins, lots of doctors on both sides, founders of hospitals. And my grandfather wanted me to be a doctor, and I passed my see needles. Um, so that was not in my future. But I've always been fascinated with all that. And in the pandemic, I'd written a few before the pandemic, and then suddenly, obviously, like a lot of us, I had a lot of time, and I found myself drawn to those kinds of topics. I write about one medical student dealing with a cadaver. I write, I would just, even though I'm terrified of it, and I would get queasy researching and writing this stuff, I couldn't look away. So,
Well, and
but
medicine has changed so much. I mean, back in the day, in the 1800s, they were giving people mercury to cure syphilis. So we've come a long way from that. So
leeches.
yeah. So Josh, tell me about, or talk about how you came up with the idea of of a woman actually hiding the birth of a child from his or her father. Um, that's a pretty interesting construct, especially these days when people are trying to seek child support and all that. So that's the opposite. So how did you land on that?
That's a scenario that I kind of just had in my back pocket for a long time. Just like actually like the title of the book, I just came across the word estuary in like probably 2016 and just wrote it in my phone like I'm going to use that somehow someday, and it just sat there forever. And it was just the same with that storyline. So when I had the idea for the diary and I needed something else for the people to do, and conflict and all that, that was just sitting there waiting for me. And yeah, I've been sitting on that one for a very long time. So I don't know where it originally came from.
Mhm.
Probably just oh, wouldn't that be weird kind of a thing.
Well, is there an estuary in your work, in this story? Is there something that where it works on two levels?
Yeah, it's a pretty main theme throughout it. Just the idea of two different things coming together to create something completely new. Um,
Mhm.
that I think it's even introduced right in the first chapter. But yeah, it's a theme that continually pops up throughout the book.
Yeah, I mean the reason that is an intriguing title to me because I live in Maryland, where parts of the Chesapeake Bay are nothing but one big estuary. That also bursts new life. I mean, that's where the crabs and stuff. So I thought that was a really interesting title because it also applies on the level of plumbing the depths of human nature and coming up with something new.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the writing practice. Can each of you talk about your writing process? Do you write every day? Do you keep journals? How do you approach your work? Is it a discipline? Is it something that you do when the spirit hits you? Like, so can each of you talk a little about your writing process?
You want to go alphabetical again?
Sure. It just makes it
Sure.
easier.
I definitely don't write every day. I don't have that much to say. But I go through periods of like extreme productivity followed by droughts, essentially. So I've been keeping a pretty good cadence of writing a book just about a year for the past 5 or 6 years or so. But I can hammer them out pretty quick, and then I just rest because I feel like if I tried to jump from one right into the other, they'd either be too similar or there just wouldn't be anything to draw from. So when I am working on something, I try to work on it every day. I've started to relax on that a bit more so that I don't end up stressing myself out with a project. But just to keep the momentum of it and to keep the characters' voices in your head and all that kind of stuff. When I'm working on something, I try to do it every day, but then I also allow myself the time to rest between so that new ideas can pop up.
And Catherine?
Yeah, Josh, I was fascinated to listen to that because I too am somebody who writes in sort of spurts or bursts, or I don't know. I've never been an everyday writer. The only time I ever kept a journal was when I was traveling. I did a lot of traveling as a young person in Asia and Europe, and so that was really helpful to just hone observations and things like that. But I've never kept any other kind of journal. But I've done a lot of good work. I almost seem to have to trick myself to write something. So I've had a dedicated writing space at different times of my life. Right now, I don't. And it seems to work better right now for me to like steal time here and, oh, I'll just be on the kitchen table, or, oh, I'll just, get my laptop into my lap on the couch and I'll write there because I'm just going to give it 30 minutes and then I end up sitting for 2 hours. I've done a lot of work at art colonies as well. I've gone away for big chunks of time when I've had the time, for 2 weeks or a month, and gotten a huge amount done. In fact, a lot of this book was written at a colony in North Georgia called the Hambidge Center. And the reason I could go during the height of the pandemic is because we each had our own cabin. And one of the stories is actually called Cabin, and it grew out of that. But many of the stories were written because it was just so productive to be, away from the noise and the clutter and the kind of stresses of life. And in that case, also the pandemic, like to be in the mountains away from people was love.
So did you do a lot of research for I mean, because to capture that doctor patient relationship and and all the stuff that goes with it, did you do a lot of research? Did you find yourself reading medical journals or reading other works that might be fictionalized? There's so many medical books. Atwal Gandhi, who writes a lot for the New Yorker, a lot of medical stuff. So how much research did you put into your stories?
I don't know about you, Josh, but I love doing research, but I also need to stop at a certain point. So I try to do just enough to for verisimilitude, um, and not to be bogged down by it. also, as I said earlier, I'm very squeamish. And so I have to push past that sometimes if I'm writing about something really intense, violence or, an operation or whatever. But yeah, I did do research. I read, there's Bill Bryson, who has written several books, wrote a book called, I think, The Body. And that is a really amazing book. And I'm a weird kid, and my grandfather was a doctor. JAMA and New England Journal of Medicine were always lying around, and I read them. Weirdo. So, so I think those, just growing up with, medical journals and medical talk at the dinner table at my grandparents' house, was just kind of, mother's milk for me.
Cool, very cool. And Josh, what kind of research did you do to write your book? Because your book works on multiple levels. There's relationships, then there's the exploration of, the grief over a child, that on two levels. One, a child you didn't know you have, then find out is dead, and then as a mother losing a child. One of the lines in your story was really profound, and that is, "Are you still a mother if you lose your child?" So, how
Yes.
much research did you need to do in order to finish or to keep yours moving forward?
So most of the research that I did, I didn't end up using at all, because it was for when the child was still alive. So I researched the disease that he had for a while. Spent a lot of time reading articles about it online and watching. There's a bunch of people on YouTube that like made videos. Here's my experience with it. So I took a lot of notes and spent a lot of time learning all about it. And then I just killed the kid anyways, and I didn't need it. So, but yeah, I mean, that's really all the research that I did for the book.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But
even
I'm
though you
sure
killed
that
the kid.
informed.
Yeah, even though you killed the kid on the literary level, you still needed to have that character worked out
Yep.
so that the
Yeah.
mother can, so the experience of that child was present in their memory.
Yeah, and you are still introduced to him here and there through memories. So I guess it did help a little bit, but not nearly on the scale that I had originally intended it to.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
So, what are some other writing practices that are helpful in getting this book done? Aside from the research about the disease, did you do? I mean, I don't know if you're a parent. If you're a parent, you probably didn't have to research into parenting, but if you're not a parent, you did. So, what were some other related work that you may not have known in your head when you sat down to write, but needed for that verisimilitude that Catherine mentioned? What are some other stuff that you researched in order to complete this book?
I mean, maybe not in the classical sense, but just reading a lot of different kinds of books, can help you in ways that you can't even enumerate sometimes. And also just giving yourself the license to just vomit things onto the page, just in an effort to dig stuff up. Like I have multiple pages where I'm literally just starting with like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing today. And then it eventually kind of maybe gets one idea by the end of it. And then kind of taking those and plugging them in and all that. I'm a big fan of outlines. I like to think of writing books as like a coloring book, to where like I know I need this type of thing to happen here, and then maybe plug that in and move it over here and that kind of stuff. It just makes it a lot easier for me knowing where it's going to be able to get there. So yeah, maybe not research, like learning how to give people surgeries and stuff. But kind of researching the story itself, I guess, is a way to say
Yeah.
it.
So, were there any times where you were like, "Oh my God, where am I going to go next?" Or did you know all along? I mean, there's that big controversy between the pantsers and the plotters.
Mhm.
So, did you have everything all plotted out? Were there any surprises?
This one was a little different in that I plotted out the first 3/4 of the book, and then waited until I was done writing that to figure out how it was going to end. I had a vague direction that I wanted it to go, but I wanted to kind of marry those two ideas even just a little bit, because I've always been a hardcore plotter. Because like I said, I don't like stressing out about, am I actually going to be able to get back to it? And also I don't like editing too much. So if I know everything beforehand, I don't have to do crazy edits afterwards and add a new character or, do that. So yeah, I kind of went half and half or I guess 3/4 and 1/4 on this one for the first time, which I enjoyed.
Yeah. And Catherine?
I'm full of admiration. I'm totally a pantser.
I am too. I must admit, I am too.
And
well, I admire the guts it takes to do that.
For short stories, that can work really well because I sit down and I, kind of cough up a draft very quickly and then, kind of can revise it over time. I have written a couple of novels and I'm hopeful that Unsolicited Press is going to publish one of them in a year or two. But those are, and I'm a pantser even when I write my novels, and I will say that it is challenging. I very much wish that I could plot things out, but I'm like my old teacher E.L. Doctorow, who said all I need is to be driving down a dark highway and to have my headlights and to be able to see as far as the headlights will take me, because if I know too much, then I'm really bored. It's then I'm just executing something that's already solved, or I don't know. I like I go.
So. No, and that makes perfect sense. And honestly, that's like a more, I don't know, more romantic way to write. I love that idea so much more than what I do.
Stressful.
It is very stressful. That's the way I do it, and I can attest that it's way more stressful than plotting.
Yeah, very much. A lot of wasted words and wasted time, but
So a lot of aspiring writers listen to the show. What is what is some advice that you want to give to people who want to be where you are? And even though in your mind you may want to be at a further place down the line, having a book published is a really big deal. And there's a lot of people who do not have a book published who are trying to have a book published, or at least trying to write one that is worthy of publications. So what advice do you want to give to those aspiring writers, no matter where they are in the process?
I have two that are both pretty cliche, but I think they're cliche because they're undeniable. The first one is to just keep going. I think I wrote five novels before I finally got one published. So you're going to fail a whole bunch, and that's just the way it goes. And honestly, it's better that way, because then when it finally happens, it feels great. And the second one is that a tap's not going to run water unless you turn it on. So if you always wait to be inspired before you start writing anything, then you're rarely going to get anything. Sometimes you sit down and just talk to yourself on a page for a while before something comes out, but you have to be sitting at a computer, notebook, typewriter, whatever, in order to do anything.
Amen to that. Very amen to that. And Catherine?
I would add to that, read as widely and deeply as you can, every possible thing that you can, from pulp fiction and graphic novels to the legendary greats, the Russians, and read everybody and everything that you can. And also, I'm 62, so this is my debut book at 62, and I've written, like Josh, many books, which are in the drawer, and I have an MFA, all that stuff. So what I wish somebody had told me was to go do something that will help you fund your dreams. I found that relatively late in life with real estate. I was kind of trying for the academic track for a long time, and that didn't prove to be fruitful for me. And real estate is so nothing like anything that I do with my writing. but it's lucrative. So, and you make your own time, so there's lots of different ways to be a writer, but you do need to have a way to feed yourself, and whether that's being a bartender, it doesn't really matter what you do. There's they will all feed your work, but there isn't only one thing. People say, "Oh, I have to be a writer. I have to be in a magazine. I have to be a journalist." No, you don't have to do any of those things. You can do anything you want. But you have to do something that can sustain you and not drain you for your work. So,
Yeah, I think some writers very famously publish lists of all the jobs that they've
yeah,
held while they were writing. I think Stephen King might
exactly.
have the longest list. I think he was even
Yeah.
a dry cleaner operator at one point.
I was a dishwasher, cater waiter.
Yeah, so that's it. I mean, it's read a lot and write
Yeah.
at, open the tap and sit down and do the work and accumulate pages. And those pages might be, practice until you get to the point where you're able to play that violin and write something on the page that's alive.
You need
So,
10,000.
I'm sorry, say that again.
You need your 10,000 hours for mastery, right? Like you
Yes.
need to do it enough to have that fluidity and that fluency. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that a job does, whether it's teaching or whether it's selling real estate or um, whatever it is that it puts you in contact with people, and people are what tell stories. People tell stories all the time. And as a
Yes.
writer, you're observing all those people telling stories.
Yes.
It's all material, sort of.
Yeah,
It is.
Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club, talks all the time about how he loves, like, people like to say that you can be a writer and not go to parties, and he's like, no, go to every single party and steal from
Yeah.
every single person you talk to. Brings a notebook and someone says something interesting, he's like, oh, okay, and he'll just write it down and put it in a book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
sort
mean,
of think
as
that's
a
fun.
realtor, I go into strangers' homes and look at all the things that they've accumulated, and it all goes in here. All the dogs.
That's really great for writing lists. List is a really good way to reveal character. Like, what does a
Yeah.
character have on their nightstand, or
Yes.
what does a character have in their bathroom? That's
Right.
that
Exactly.
is very revealing. Well, we have. I want to thank everyone who is here, who joined us tonight. I would like to thank especially Josh and Catherine for sharing their work with us. Our next show is. Let me find the date. I had it a minute ago, and it's in my pile of papers here. It's 2 weeks from now. Where did I put it? Of course, I. Anyway, our next show is in 2 weeks. Um, So I hope that people who are joining us tonight will be wanting to come back and listen to our streamed readings in 2 weeks. Thank you very much to those who joined. Thank you for leaving comments. We got some great comments this evening. So thank you for that. And I want to remind everyone, like, follow, share, and do all the things. And we'll see you again soon. And Catherine and Josh, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And don't forget, if you want to buy these books, 20% off of the books on the Unsolicited Press website with the code Literary Nights. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, y'all. It was
Thank
great. Thanks.